The 13-year-old was one of 4 teenagers found bound, gagged, and shot inside this burning I Can't Believe It's Yogurt shop on December 6, 1991.
Tomorrow marks 30 years since the quadruple murder at a North Austin yogurt shop.
30 years ago in Austin, Texas, 4 teenage girls were murdered in a yogurt shop. And to this day, the case remains unsolved.
Today, the family prays for closure, remembering Amy, who they say wore her heart on her sleeve and loved horses.
There are people out there who know, everyone that was involved, who know exactly what happened. After 20 years, it's time to come forward and tell us.
It's the evening of December 6, 1991, a crisp Friday night in Austin, Texas. 2 17-year-olds, Jennifer Harbison and her friend Eliza Thomas, were wrapping up their late shift at a local frozen yogurt shop called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, nestled in a strip mall. Just before they finished up, Jennifer's 15-year-old younger sister Sarah and Sarah's 13-year-old friend Amy Ayers, who were planning a sleepover that night, well, they stopped by the store to see if Jennifer could give them a ride home. With 4 girls in the shop, they probably felt pretty safe and secure as they closed up for the night. But they had no idea just how dangerous things were about to get. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Today, we're diving into one of Texas' most haunting unsolved mysteries, a case that has troubled investigators and haunted an entire community for over 3 decades. What began as an ordinary night at a suburban Austin yogurt shop turned into a tragedy that would leave 4 young lives cut devastatingly short and a city changed forever. Despite countless hours of investigation, multiple suspects and even false confessions, the true perpetrators have never been brought to justice. This is a story about 4 bright, ambitious teenage girls whose futures were stolen and the questions that still remain unanswered today. Jennifer Ann Harbison, who worked at the yogurt shop, was a senior at Lanier High School, where she was the president of the Future Farmers of America programme. She also led the school's drill team, the Vikettes, and was active on the track team. Before landing her job at I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, she worked at an Albertsons grocery store. It was very clear that she was a hard-working, determined young woman with tons of passion and a bright future ahead of her. Her younger sister, Sarah Louise Harbison, was just a freshman at Lanier High School, but already making her mark as a junior varsity cheerleader. Just like her sister, she was involved in the Future Farmers of America programme and was on the student council. Sarah had a love for raising lambs for the Travis County Livestock Show and Rodeo, and she also enjoyed collecting rocks and seashells. Sarah's friend, Amy Lee Ayers, was an 8th grader at Burnett Middle School, where she was on the yearbook staff. She was also involved in the Junior Future Farmers of America programme and showed hogs at the Travis County Fair and Rodeo. Amy even won the Arts and Crafts division at the fair with a needlepoint doorstop. She dreamt of becoming a veterinarian one day, and she was a big fan of George Strait and adored cats. By all accounts, Amy was just the sweetest young girl. Finally, there was Eliza Hope Thomas, who worked alongside Jennifer at the yogurt shop. Eliza was a senior at Lanier High School, where she had a passion for reading and country dancing. Just like Amy, she also aspired to become a veterinarian and rancher. For her Future Farmers of America project, Eliza had raised a pig named Stoney. Her mother believed Eliza had the potential to become a writer, but her principal saw her talent for agricultural mechanics. See, Eliza excelled at welding and small engine repair. Nothing unusual seemed to happen that night leading up to closing time, but around 9:30 p.m, a suspicious individual was spotted wearing a green army jacket at the shop. He stayed in the store for quite a while, walking to the back without asking for permission. When a customer asked one of the girls about him, she casually mentioned that he was using the restroom. It appeared that this man spent quite some time at the shop, using the bathroom several times during his visit. At some point, the man in the green jacket left the restroom and joined another individual in a booth. Witnesses described this second man as wearing a black jacket with light hair, and he stood around 5 foot 6 inches tall. He was in his late 20s or maybe early 30s, and although he ordered a Sprite, he didn't seem to be in any sort of hurry to leave, staying without ordering anything else substantial. After the store had cleared out for the night, these two men still lingered behind until at least 10:47 PM. When Jennifer and Eliza finally closed the store at 11, they rang up a no sale tag at 11:03 PM, which signalled that the register was closed for the night and they were finishing up for the evening. Just before midnight, whilst patrolling the area, Officer Troy Gay from the Austin Police Department, well, he noticed smoke rising from the strip mall where the yogurt shop was located. Thinking that it might just be a minor kitchen fire, he called it in, and the fire department quickly responded. But what they found when they entered the store was far from ordinary. Inside the store, the firefighters discovered the bodies of 3 of the girls. It wasn't until about half an hour later that they then found the 4th girl, Amy Ayers' body in another part of the store. The scene had been deliberately set on fire, likely to attempt to destroy any evidence.
Okay, at 11:47, one of our patrol officers called in to dispatch smoke coming out from, I can't believe it's yogurt. Fire department got here shortly thereafter. What we found in the back there was we found 4 victims. We're handling it as a homicide right now because it appears that one of the victims was struck in the head.
Were the victims together or were they in different parts of the building?
No, I can't. Can't give you that either.
Were they bound in any way?
Can't give you that.
Was there any sign of forced entry to the building?
Can't give you that.
What can you give?
Just what I gave you. It's still very early in the investigation, okay?
The killer, or killers, had gathered napkins and other flammable items from around the shop, soaked them and the bodies with lighter fluid, and then set the place on fire before fleeing the area. Autopsy results showed high levels of BTU output, which indicated an accelerant was probably used. It's believed the girls had already been murdered before the fire had started. Unfortunately, much of the DNA evidence was destroyed in the fire, either by the flames or even the sprinkler system that went off.
The Lanier School community, student body, and faculty and staff have been saddened by the tragic deaths of 4 young ladies for whom we mourn today.
They're grieving for their classmates. 3 of the victims were students at Lanier High School. Today, the students tried to deal with the loss and their pain together.
This is probably the worst, most heinous crime that has happened in the city ever.
Students are encouraged to talk about their feelings. A team of counselors is at the school to help them. There are so many questions and fears now about things many of these teenagers never even thought about.
I mean, they died and they were so, they were our age. And I mean, it makes you really think, tomorrow isn't promised. And I mean, anybody here may not be here tomorrow, and it's just scary and it hurts.
I mean, you don't ever think anybody's going to come into a yogurt place and shoot you. And shoot you and all your friends. It just doesn't happen in a yogurt place.
However, police were able to recover some usable DNA from Amy's body. Although testing techniques at the time weren't advanced enough to match it to any specific individual, they did find DNA on the clothing used to tie up Eliza. It would take several years before advances in forensic science would allow researchers to connect those samples to DNA profiles. During the investigation, it became clear that 2 different guns had been used in these murders, which pointed to the possibility of at least 2 perpetrators being involved. It was also discovered that around $540 had gone missing from the store, but to me, that seems like robbery was just a secondary motive, likely an afterthought to something far more sinister. A lot of key evidence was destroyed in the fire, and the firefighters, not realising they were walking into a crime scene, well, they unknowingly contributed to that loss. Plus, this was the early 90s, and DNA testing wasn't nearly as advanced as it is today. The city of Austin was understandably shaken. This was a brutal crime that felt completely senseless and random, and the police were determined to find those responsible as quickly as possible, not only for justice, but to ease the community's fear. The phones at the police station were constantly ringing, flooding with tips, and in fact there were 342 suspects to sift through, along with numerous false confessions. It quickly became overwhelming as they worked to sort through all the leads. They decided to focus on known serial killers who might have been in the area at that time, since this crime didn't appear to be the work of any sort of amateur. The first person that they zeroed in on was a guy called Kenneth Allen McDuff. McDuff's criminal history began with the brutal murder of 3 teenagers back in August of 1966, Robert Brand, Mark Dunman and Edna Louise Sullivan, a case that became known as the Broomstick Murders. After being convicted of this, McDuff was eventually released, only to be arrested multiple times later on for parole violations. However, he was never locked up for long periods of time. By the time the murders of the 4 girls had occurred, he was out on parole, which made him a person of interest in their case. But after investigation, they eventually ruled him out as a suspect. In 1992, McDuff was then arrested for the murder of the 22-year-old Melissa Ann Northrup from Texas. He was later linked to at least 3 other murders. After his release, he worked at a gas station, earning $4 an hour, and even took a class at Texas State Technical College in Waco. However, after quitting his job and dropping out of that school, he went on to commit more murders just a year later. After then becoming a wanted fugitive, McDuff fled to Kansas City, but was eventually caught following a tip from America's Most Wanted. He was sentenced to death and subsequently executed on November 17th of 1998 at the Huntsville unit. Before his execution though, McDuff claimed responsibility for the yogurt shop murders, but police believed his confession to be false. As the investigation then progressed, authorities started to focus on younger people, likely in their late teens or maybe early 20s. They theorised that perhaps a group of kids went into the shop intending to steal the $540 from the register, but things then escalated. Their search led them to a teenager called Morris Pierce, who had been arrested with a gun at the North Cross Mall shortly before the murders. So Morris Pierce was then brought in for questioning along with 3 of his friends that he had been hanging out with that day: Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen and Forrest Wellborn. However, nothing came from these interviews. They couldn't link Pierce's gun to the yogurt shop murders as the ballistics just simply didn't match, so they moved on from this lead. The investigation was overwhelmed with false confessions from people claiming responsibility for the murders, likely just wanting attention or to be part of a high-profile case. However, for any confession to be taken seriously, there had to be evidence to back it up, maybe something that they could only know if they actually carried out the crime, and none of these confessions could provide any of that. Typically, the person would eventually retract their statement, admitting that they were just trying to impress other people. As time passed on, the investigation continued with no solid leads. The families of the victims were obviously growing frustrated. They wanted justice for their daughters, who had been taken from them in the most horrific way. Then, in 1999, nearly 8 years after the murders, investigators came forward with 4 real suspects: Forrest Wellborn, Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen and Morris Pierce, who were all in their 20s by this point. These were the same 4 individuals who had been questioned and dismissed years earlier. Morris Pierce was the 16-year-old caught at the mall with the gun. This time, however, when the new detective spoke to the group, they got a crucial break. See, Michael Scott confessed. He said, "I remember looking at this girl. I hear the gun go off. I only pulled the trigger once. I hear another gun go off. I think I hear a total of 5 shots." Then Robert Springsteen gave a second confession, telling investigators that he not only killed one of the girls, but also assaulted her. According to the police theory based on these confessions, what likely happened was that these 4 men planned to rob the yogurt shop. 3 of them went inside while the 4th acted as a lookout outside. However, things quickly escalated, and instead of just taking the money, they ended up violating and then murdering these girls. Morris Pierce and Forrest Wellborn, the other 2 men implicated, well, they refused to confess. Both claimed that they had absolutely nothing to do with the murders and weren't going to admit something that they didn't do. With no evidence linking them to the actual crime, charges against them were eventually dropped.
What did police make you do with that 380? Huh? What did he tell you to do? If that's right, what's going to happen? What did you do? Which one? Okay, where? Where did you think he shoot? Wow. Where? I shut it down. You already fill up. What happened? You're good. What else? What else? Yeah, you did. You did. You're there. Absolutely. You are there. I don't think you weren't there, right? Yes, you do. You know how to just say it. That's my generation.
You want the truth, and you know what the truth is. You're having trouble with the memories and flashbacks. You know what happened. You're scared to tell us. I don't blame you. It's a horrible thing what you saw in there. But you know, can I tell you what I keep seeing in my head? Tell us what you see in your head. I keep seeing these girls get shot. Right. Tell us what that looks like. Tell us what you see specifically. How they're getting shot and who's shooting them. Come on, Mike, we're doing good. Tell us. Let's do this today. Let's do it. Seeing girls, I'll never see her down. I remember one girl screaming, terrified. Okay? I don't know if this is real or not, or if this is Michael, it's real. It's okay. You can present it any way you want. It's real. Mike, look at me. You're remembering what happened because you were inside there, right? You're remembering what happened. I don't actually remember going in the building. But you were in the building. You went in there with me. I don't believe that, Michael. You don't remember going in there. And you know you were in there. Did you shoot any of those girls? No, sir. Then tell us what happened. What do those two boys do to those girls? You want to live with this the rest of your life? No, I don't. Then get it out right now. They're you over. They're the ones that shot the girls. Do it. What did you see happen? At some point where he's handing that revolver, what does he say to you? Either shoot him or you're next. That's what he said. Because I didn't want to do it. Right. Either shoot him or you're next. What do you remember hearing then? I remember looking at this girl. I cry. I hear Robert saying, do it, do it. I hear the gun go off. I only pulled the trigger once.
Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, the two men who had confessed, were tried separately for the yogurt shop murders. Both were found guilty of capital murder. Springsteen was sentenced to death, while Scott received a 99-year prison sentence. However, both men later on claimed that their confessions were coerced, but by then it was far too late to take them back. Despite these confessions, there wasn't one single piece of DNA evidence that linked either of them to this crime. The interrogations were full of mishandling. One of the detectives involved in the case was transferred after allegations of extorting confessions in a different case. Additionally, a photo surfaced showing another member of the Austin Police Department pointing a gun at Scott's head during his interrogation.
I remember looking at the gun. You ever seen that gun before? I'm not positive. Does that look like a gun you've seen before? It looks like a gun I've seen before, but I'm not positive. Is that the gun you shot somebody with, Mike? I don't. Is that the gun you walked up behind somebody with and shot in the head? Is that the one? Talk to me, Mike. Yes, sir. You did that, didn't you? Yes, sir.
I mean, for the families of the victims, right? Police conducting themselves in that way. I mean, I get that they need to get the case solved, but that's just going to hinder things for the longest time. 15 years after the yogurt shop murders, and after 10 years of both Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen serving time in prison, a shocking turn of events occurred. Their convictions were ultimately overturned, and the cases were dismissed. Here's why. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to confront an accuser, but in Scott and Springsteen's cases, their confessions were used against each other. However, they were never allowed to cross-examine one another at trial, violating their constitutional rights. This led to the case being thrown out, and a new legal process then began. As difficult as this must have been for the victims' families to relive, this decision became a turning point for both Scott and Springsteen. Remember, Springsteen had confessed to assaulting one of the victims, but when DNA evidence came back, it shocked the prosecutors. The DNA found at the crime scene didn't actually match Springsteen, or any of the other men for that matter that were accused of this crime. Whilst the court officially believed they had the right suspects, they decided that no re-prosecution would happen until the unknown man, whose DNA was linked in this case, could be identified. Everyone else who was at the shop was identified, except for those two men. They have never been identified, still to this day. It is very likely that these two men, who are believed to be the last two people to see the girls alive, are the real culprits here, and that DNA evidence that they have, well, it likely belongs to one of them. So, on December 23rd of 2010, Austin police officer Frank Wilson and his rookie partner Bradley Smith pulled over a vehicle being driven by Morris Pierce. Now, remember, he was one of the 4 originally arrested in connection with the yogurt shop murders. After a brief foot chase, Pierce struggled with Wilson before pulling out a knife from his belt and stabbing Officer Wilson in the neck. Fortunately though, the cop survived the attack and managed to draw his gun, fatally shooting Pierce. As for the DNA evidence, so in 2017, a newer method called YSTR DNA profiling was used to analyse the DNA found at the crime scene. The results were submitted to a searchable database, and there was a match. However, the match only connected to a potential family member of the killer, not the perpetrator directly. Police were hopeful that this lead could help track down the actual killer, but when they sought further information from the FBI, officials informed them that the information was protected under federal law and not as significant as they had hoped. This meant that the DNA match couldn't be used to narrow down the identity of the actual killer. As we reflect on the tragic events that unfolded in that yogurt shop in 1991, it's clear that the pain, the loss, and the unanswered questions still weigh heavily on the hearts of all those affected. The victims, Jennifer, Sarah, Amy and Eliza, were young, vibrant lives full of promise, and their families continue to live with the unimaginable grief of their untimely deaths. While the pursuit of justice has been long, fraught with challenges and marked by unexpected turns, one thing remains undeniable: the search for truth is far from over. The victims' families, as well as the wider community, continue to hope for closure, to find answers that may bring some sense of peace, even if it feels distant. Though the case is cold and time marches on, we cannot forget the power of sharing these stories, remembering the victims and never losing sight of the pursuit of justice. There are still unanswered questions, and perhaps someone somewhere holds the key to solving this case once and for all. Let's not allow the memory of those 4 girls to fade. Let's continue to spread the word, hold onto hope, and stand in solidarity with their families. Because cold cases, while tough, they're not unsolvable. And one day, justice may finally find its way home. Hey you, listen, thanks for taking the time to watch my wee video today. It always makes me sad covering these unsolved cases. Anyway, let's go and get a cup of tea. Please folks, stay safe out there. Tell someone that you love them. And despite all the evil in the world, just remember, keep smiling.